Mental health issues can strike anyone because the brain, like any organ, can malfunction. Today, we're fortunate. We have more tools than before. Every single day, people are working to make it better because it's far from perfect. But believe it or not, we've come a long way. Open your eyes and let History Scalpel show you where we started. Picture this. Instead of counseling, support, and medications, people resorted to drilling holes into the skulls of the afflicted. You heard that right. This was actually the OG way of tackling mental illness. They called it trephination. I'm talking about skulls from a whopping 10,000 years ago, with holes bored into them. Trephination, or trepanning if you want to get fancy, might just be the oldest surgical procedure in the human playbook. Why, you ask? Well, back in the day, our ancestors were a bit clueless about what caused headaches, hallucinations, and weird behaviors. So, Stone Age surgeons might have thought, hey, let's drill a hole and let the evil spirits out. Or maybe they were onto something more practical, trying to ease the pressure on the brain. Fun fact, this brain pressure relieving procedure is still a thing in hospitals today. And get this, it wasn't some rare offbeat thing. In a burial site dating back to 4500 BC in France, they found that 1/3 of the skulls, I repeat, 40 out of 120, had holes deliberately drilled into them. Now, that's commitment. Surprisingly, this trepanning trend didn't fade away for a while. No, it was still all the rage among surgeons until the late 1700s. And get this, even later on, some practitioners were offering it up as an alternative remedy. In a 1986 interview for Musician magazine, Paul McCartney spilled the beans about how John Lennon tried to rope him and Linda into this skull drilling in the late 60s to relieve pressure. Talk about a wild remedy. Thankfully, they declined that invitation. Another way the ancients treated mental issues involved a rather peculiar cocktail of blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. These bodily fluids were linked to temperatures, wet or dry conditions, and even star signs. It almost feels like the body had its own weather system complete with zodiac signs. Here, doctors played the balancing act with a patient's humors with things like the patient's diet or herbal concoctions. Think of it as medicine meets smoothies. So basically, if you were considered disturbed in the Middle Ages, they'd blame it on an excess of blood. The fix? Drain it out, whether by some good old cutting or leech therapy. And ladies with nervous disorders? Brace yourself. They believed you lost too much blood during that monthly visit from Aunt Flo. The remedy? Purging, with emetics to chill out the yellow bile, or an enema to bid farewell to the black bile. Mental health treatment from the 1500s to the 1970s was a horror show, a dark age of cruelty that featured places like the St. Mary Bethlehem Hospital founded in 1247. Sounds innocent, right? Well, it has a dark past that earned its familiar name, Bedlam. You might have heard the word Bedlam to describe a scene of madness, chaos, or great confusion. That word started as a nickname for St. Mary Bethlehem Hospital before ending up in the dictionary. This insane asylum was in operation for more than 500 years because it didn't take much to end up there. If you were a woman dealing with postnatal depression, alcoholism, or even just some good old senile dementia, chances are you could find yourself locked up in such a madhouse. Wow, right? And it gets wilder. Londoners, deemed a bit loopy by the authorities, found themselves crammed into Bedlam's narrow hallways, chained up to stone walls and floors. Orderlies had a knack for dishing out beatings for the tiniest slip-ups, and getting a decent meal was as irregular and rare as winning the lottery. Sanitary conditions? Let's not even go there. It was a real low point in the history of mental health treatment. So picture this scene. Anyone could easily sweet-talk two doctors into signing certificates of insanity. Why? To conveniently toss away relatives who were either a nuisance or just plain embarrassing. Women, being in a lower social status with less power and cash, were more vulnerable. If their husbands got a bit fed up, bam, off to the madhouse they went. Now, guess where some unlucky ladies ended up? Bedlam Hospital, a place that's changed addresses more time than your grandma's favorite tea cozy. Currently standing in West Wickham, Bromley, after its grand move in 1930. Not surprisingly, there were many similar infamous asylums elsewhere in the world too. In the USA, Waverly, Danvers State, Topeka State, and Athens Lunatic Asylum are a few examples. In some cases, their grounds serve as haunted locations for the curious tourist. And then, in 1883, when Sir Francis Galton dropped the term eugenics all the way up to World War II, he believed that good genetics, or good breeding, would prevent mental illness. It was all about cutting off that supposed genetic source of ailments by putting a hard stop on the multiplication of the unfit. And by that, I mean forced sterilization. Time to delve into the early 20th century stages, a time when folks had this wild idea that shaking up insane brains could somehow hit the reset button, almost like a blast from the ancient four humors past. Picture this. They'd slam massive insulin doses to induce a coma over weeks, basically messing with the brain to force a reset. That sounds intense. Now, here's a showstopper. A drug called metrazole that caused seizures, making patients feel like impending doom was right around the corner. It was such a nasty experience that people fought against it. Enter the overuse of straitjackets and padded rooms. Hold on tight for this one. Zapping up to 240 volts through brains to trigger seizures, patients collapsing left and right. But somehow, they thought it was a successful treatment. Shocking, literally. And to top it all off, imagine dunking patients in ice water for the ultimate shock factor. Seizures, coma, and maybe even death. Talk about dark times, right? It was a real roller coaster of insanity. The whole idea behind those shock therapies back in the day was to change the damaged part of the brain thought to be causing all the wacky behavior. And guess what? Surgeons in the 20th century took it up a notch with a surgical brain-damaging method known as a lobotomy. Now, there were a few ways to pull off this brain tinkering, but the fancy version involved a doc sliding a needle through the thin bone behind the eye, right into the frontal lobe of the brain. Their mission? Cut connections in the prefrontal cortex. Around 50,000 to 60,000 people went through this procedure. And you want to know what they got in return? A flat personality, memory loss, and a lifetime of struggling to relate to others. It was like a messed up brain version of a bad haircut that never grows out. Come 1956, and the FDA approval of Thorazine, mental health treatment entered a new era where treatments were based on more rigorous evidence. It wasn't ideal, but it was the foundation of how we come up with medications like Zoloft. Modern medicine now boasts stricter standards of care for the mentally ill. Approved treatments require informed consent, ensuring patients or their decision makers understand the approach. Care teams, consisting of qualified professionals, follow best practices to create safe, therapeutic environments. Less invasive treatments take precedence, followed by evidence-based drug and procedural therapies. It's a far cry from the horrors of the past, as we strive to a more humane approach to mental health.